We have a special guest this afternoon, Commissioner Linda Akutagwa is the president and CEO of LEAP, LEAP Education for Asian Pacific. She's a nationally recognized speaker and facilitator on leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, nonprofits, and board of governance. Linda received her BS in international business with a minor in economics from California State University at Los Angeles. She is registered as a non-party preference. Commissioner Akutagwa, thank you for joining us this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Darcy, for having me and inviting me to come and present to the Orange County Realtors. And I just feel like at least you recognize. I like that you recognize my background that you'll see here is the Huntington Beach Pier. I live down in the Huntington Harbor area, so it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and just really appreciate this opportunity to be able to talk with all of you about just the basics of redistricting, because what we're trying to do is to be able to, we're kind of jokingly say make redistricting more sexy so that people will be interested in being engaged in the process of redistricting with all of us. And so I hope that as a result of this, you'll walk away at least feeling not only more informed, but more excited about being able to take part and being engaged and providing community input, your input about your community. So I'm one of 14 commissioners that was selected to draw the new electoral districts following the 2020 census. And let me just tell you a little bit about myself beyond just what I've already, what's already been shared. As you can tell, I am a resident of Orange County. I was born and raised in California, so I am very much a native Californian, and one that feels very strongly that being able to give back to my community, specifically in this case my community of Californians, is something that really incentivized me to want to apply for this. I'll be honest, I never thought that I would get selected. When I was selected, there was a lot of people that had applied, and so it's just an honor to be on this. So, all right, so let me just go ahead and I'm going to move my slides along, and let's see. Okay. So one of the things that I do want to make sure that that I say to everybody, we do take transparency very seriously. So I do want to just say that no public input will be taken today. So just a friendly reminder that our California Government Code Section 82533 strictly forbids commissioners and staff from taking public input outside of a regularly scheduled commission meeting or official public input meeting. So, but I do want to just let you know that you are more than welcome to provide input via one of the multiple ways that we have. So you can go to our website, and through WeDrawTheLineCA.org, you can provide input either via email, or there's a link to our Communities of Interest tool at drawmycacommunity.org. You could also snail mail. There's some that would say letter writing is a lost art. So you can also send a letter via mail, and you can also even call our office and leave a message, and your input would be taken in that way. We are also in the process of scheduling public input meetings in which members of the community can come and provide input during one of those meetings. However, all input is equal, and so any one of the ways that I just mentioned is an option for you as well too. So just want to say that. So let's talk about redistricting. So what is redistricting? So it's redistricting is defined as drawing new boundaries that determine which Californians are represented by each electoral district. So as you see from this picture here, we just took part in the census. The next part is redistricting, and then the next part after that is that it leads to representation when we vote. So why do we draw new district maps? We draw new district maps because, you know, a lot can change in 10 years. And I'm sure that we're seeing, especially as realtors, you see the impacts of change. People move, people, you know, people are born, people pass away. Communities will grow in size. Some communities will shrink in size. So from a redistricting and a electoral districts perspective, areas that were once roughly the same number of people become unequal. And so redistricting, what it does is it helps to rebalance the numbers so that each district will be roughly the same size. And so that's why we do take part in redistricting. So your voice, your choice. So the other part about redistricting and why it's important for you to be involved is that one of the greatest powers that the people of California have been given is to elect our own representatives to conduct the business of our government. So how district lines or boundaries are configured can make the difference between empowering and maximizing we the voters' voices, or minimizing or muting our voices. And in many other states, you know, politicians are the ones that redraw the district lines. And of course, we know, we've heard many stories where politicians will draw quote unquote safe districts for themselves to allow themselves to stay in office. And so, you know, this is a way for us to be able to fully participate and take part in this redistricting process, so that more communities can have the opportunity to elect candidates of our choice. So speaking up about your community is critical to helping to ensure that your community, you know, is kept within a district, but also it ensures that your voice and your community's voice is heard by elected officials that will represent, hopefully, or will be mindful of your community's interests. And so when they're making decisions about the quality and funding, about things that you care about, maybe your child's education, you know, transportation, because obviously that's a huge issue here in Southern California, our tax rates, we want to make sure that we have elected officials that really listen to us. And so that's why, you know, having your input is valuable in shaping the new district or political boundaries. So there's 4 ways in which redistricting affects each of us. And we thought it would just be, you know, helpful to just break it down into these 4 particular areas. So one is power to the people. The Voters' Choice Act was historic in California. It transferred the power of drawing new electoral district maps away from politicians, and it gave it to us, the people of California. Secondly, it enables us to have a champion for our issues. So having the opportunity to be able to elect representatives that can champion our issues, I think is important in a state as large and as diverse as California is, where you know, issues can vary drastically from almost like one street or one freeway from the next. We know that in Northern California, they might find that issues around environmental or economic issues are going to be really important, whereas in Central California, they're going to be more focused possibly on things like water and agricultural issues. And then here in Southern California, you know, we're going to be particularly interested in things like transportation and housing and employment issues as well, too. Another way in which redistricting also affects us personally, or could affect us personally, is just funding priorities. You know, so tied to the issue of electing representatives that can champion our issues is having representatives that will ensure that they understand not only our issues but will also have our financial interests at heart. So when time comes to, you know, building a budget, you know, we'll want representatives that will fight to ensure that our community gets the financial resources that it deserves for the kind of services that we want for our communities: education, water, fire protection, housing, and transportation, for example. The last part of the way in which redistricting can affect us is our community boundaries. So the redistricting process is all about drawing lines and determining which communities get grouped into which district. And so as realtors, I know that you're very familiar with geography and the regions in which you work and you live in. And so given that, your input is going to be really important to this process, to helping us, the commissioners, understand where a community that you feel is an important community of interest, where does it start and where does it end? And so redistricting in California is one of the few civic activities in which any Californian can provide input regarding their community. And ultimately, that input could potentially impact laws and regulations, tax structures, how funding is distributed, and even which services are provided. So, for example, if any of you happen to have high school seniors, maybe they're not yet 18, but, this is an opportunity for you to encourage them to really understand civic participation, civic engagement, and get them interested in issues that can potentially later on impact them, because these district boundaries will last for 10 years. Okay, so the road to fair representation. The US Constitution requires that every American receive as close to equal representation as is possible in government. And again, I mentioned this earlier, communities change. So as populations of a district change over time, it can leave some people overrepresented and others underrepresented. So for example, if a representative has more people that have moved into their districts, then that means that they have to try to represent more people. So in that way, the people who are in a district that has grown beyond the initial size are underrepresented, because you have a representative that has to represent more people. Versus if you have a community that shrinks in size, well, that one representative now, it's easier for them because they don't have to represent as many people. And so those people become overrepresented. And so what it does, what redistricting does is it ensures that there will be even populations between districts, so that then it will have proper or fair representation. So after we just went through the process of reapportionment. So, the federal government publishes the updated state census information. What we do is once we receive that, and we're expecting the new census data, so upon which we'll be basing our new line drawing, or the redrawing of the new district lines. We'll be redrawing the boundaries of congressional, state senate, state assembly, and state board of equalization districts, so that again, each district correctly reflects the latest count of the current state population. Redistricting is based on the idea that all of our voices should be represented fairly by creating districts that, again, have the same number, and those census results are used. So as we went through reapportionment, we do know that California, for the next 10 years, will have 52 House seats. And that means that we're down from the 53 that we previously had. So we are seeing that there's going to be new district lines drawn for sure. Historically, legislatures have drawn maps that allow them to choose the constituents, that rather than enabling us, the constituents, choose their representatives, even though we have an election. This way we can ensure that we're going to have likely candidates that we can then choose from to really represent our interests. So the former system, where the politicians drew their lines, undermined the concept of fair representation, and which now, with the system that we have, gives people, us, the people, the power to choose our representatives. So why does independent redistricting matter? So I want to show you here just an example of why it matters. So I've talked about how redistricting can affect us, and let me just talk about why independent redistricting matters. So democracy depends on voters having the opportunity to choose their representatives. So when elected officials draw the lines of their own districts, they get to design their own territory and choose who their voters are going to be. So as you'll see from this slide here, gerrymandering happens when election district boundaries are drawn in a way that gives a particular set of people, like a political party, or even a racial group, an unfair political advantage over another. So what I'm going to use is, just for example, we have 50 people represented by orange and purple squares. So let's just say that of the 50 people, 60% are orange people and 40% are 40 people. So we can draw potentially 5 different districts in multiple ways, but it's not always going to be fair. So the first 2 examples are going to show ways in which district lines are drawn in a fair manner, where the districts are drawn to represent or to reflect the proportion of the population, 60% orange, 40% purple. The 2 examples on the right-hand side show ways in which a district map can be drawn in a way that does not reflect the population fairly, and it's referred to as gerrymandering. And so this is why independent commissions like California's commission were created, to remove politics from the process and focus on the people, and doing so in a way that enables the entire people of California to see how we're going to go about, or how we're going about the drawing of the district lines. So there are certain things that I want to share with you that we must follow. We are legally required to follow this criteria in this order, and these are weighted criteria. So first and most important is that districts must be of nearly equal population to comply with the US Constitution. So that is our very first cut. We're just going to make sure that each district size is equal, or as near equal as we can get to for each district. Number 2, we must follow the Voting Rights Act. So district must comply with the Voting Rights Act to ensure that minorities have a fair opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. Number 3, contiguity. It means that districts must be drawn contiguously so that all parts of the district are connected to each other. So, for example, a district cannot include a part of Huntington Beach and then, skip over Costa Mesa and then take a part of Irvine and Newport Beach, because we're not all contiguously, connected together. So it must all be connected. Number 4, we have to follow communities of interest. So districts must minimize the division of cities, counties, neighborhoods, and communities of interest to the extent possible. So, one example that when I think about a community of interest that I'll use is, like if you go down near like Anaheim and you have, Angel Stadium on one side and you have the Honda Center on the other side. Some may say, hey, the 2 stadiums represent a distinct community of interest because the businesses that surround it are dependent on, the business that the stadiums will also bring in. And so that's an example of a community of interest. And of course, it's divided by the 57 freeway. But just imagine if on one side, there was a district that included Anaheim Stadium, but then on the other side of the 57, Honda Center was in a completely different district. Some may argue, but that's not really in the best interest of the businesses that are in that area, and that they're better represented by one elected representative that has both in the district. Some may say, what, the freeway could be a good way to just create completely new districts. But what we would try to do, what we would look for is the inputs from people saying, hey, for example, if you're not from Orange County, you're not going to know that kind of detail, that nuance. I know it because I'm from the area, and so I would know, like, yeah, that would not make sense to break that up. But to somebody else, we may, they could just look at a portion, like just on the map, hey, this makes for a natural break. And this could happen in smaller ways in other communities, around Orange County, but also throughout the state too. And that's why getting everybody, as many people's community of interest input is going to be important, because it helps us to understand those nuances. Number 5 is geographically compact. So as much as possible, we're required to try to keep a district as compact as possible. So for example, you won't have a elected representative that has to drive literally 3 hours from one end of their district to the other. What comes to mind is, for example, in like Inyo County, it includes like up through like Mono Lake and Bishop, and it extends all the way down into like the Palm Springs, kind of San Bernardino County area. That's a long distance to drive, but as much as possible, we're required to try to ensure that we create districts that have the required equal populations, but are also geographically compact as well too. The last one is, as much as we can, where practicable, each Senate district should be comprised of 2 complete and adjacent assembly districts. A Board of Equalization district should be comprised of 2 complete and adjacent state Senate districts. And so this way, in addition, the place of residence of any incumbent or political candidate may not be considered in the creation of a map, and a district may not be drawn for the purpose of favoring or discriminating against an incumbent, a political candidate, or a political party. Okay, moving on. I just want to mention that there are many different redistricting efforts. So the State Citizens Redistricting Commission is not the only commission that's working on redistricting. Counties, cities, school districts, water districts, community college districts, there's going to be all different kinds of redistricting efforts going on, including here in Orange County as well too. And I think, again, even in those kind of efforts, input from the people of the areas are going to be really important to drawing better district lines. So within that, I just want to just briefly touch upon some of the history. One of the things that was, interestingly, I guess I never really thought about it until somebody said it, but the 2020 Citizens Redistricting Commission is only the second time that the people of California have been able to take part in a redistricting effort. The very first one was in 2010, because it was in 2008 that California voters passed Proposition 11, the Voters First Act, which authorized the creation of an independent redistricting commission. And then in 2010, Proposition 20 added the responsibility of drawing congressional lines. So the first one only allowed us to draw state Senate, state Assembly, and Board of Equalization. And then the second proposition added the congressional districts to the commission's responsibilities. And so 2010, and then now 2020. And so we realized that this is still a new kind of activity, for a lot of us. And so that's why we're doing presentations like this and encouraging more people to be aware of it, to get engaged. Hopefully people will start to see it as important as not only the census, but as voting is as well too. So our goal is to spread the word as far and wide as we can that our work didn't end with the census, and that we need your input to help us understand the nuances of your communities, so that when we draw these district lines, we can draw better district lines because we have better information. And I do want to mention that other states do have independent redistricting commissions, and others are looking at it as well too. So, maybe this is something that's going to catch on in other places. So I mentioned that when I applied, I did it because I wanted to give back. I didn't think that I was going to get selected because, like I said, there were over 20,000 applicants, and that 20,000 was narrowed down to 2,000. and then 120 applicants were invited to take part in an interview. And then that 120 applicant pool was then narrowed down to 60 applicants. Their names were forwarded to the California State Legislature, in which then the members of the legislature were able to strike eight people from the pool. So they were able to strike 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and two others. And so so it was a total of 24 that were struck. I'm sorry, I should have said 3, 3, 2. It was they took away 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans, 8 no party preference. So 24 candidates were removed. So the remaining 36 were then put into a, just imagine the lotto and the ping pong balls. So just those 36 names were put in, and the first 8 were selected via just a random drawing. So 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 2 no party preference. And then those 8 then selected the final 6, of which I was selected from that final 6. And just so that you are aware, these are my fellow Redistricting Commission members. We are 8 women, 6 men. We are from across the state, Northern, Central, and Southern California. We are 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 no party preference. And by the way, I do want to say, if any of you are interested in just, kind of curious about who we are and how we work together, I invite you to, if you have the time, join us for one of our public meetings. We meet via Zoom, and it's all open for the public to watch. Our agendas are posted 14 days in advance. So if there's anything that's of interest to you that you want to ask, you are more than welcome to, hey, please just join us and listen in. So there are 2 key duties that I think that we as commissioners have. In addition to these education opportunities where we are helping people to really be engaged and at least learn about, how you can get engaged. The other key role that we have is the line drawing. So the actual, drawing of the new electoral districts. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be drawing 52 districts for Congress. We're going to draw 40 districts for state Senate, 80 districts for state assembly, and 4 districts for the State Board of Equalization. So you could kind of get a sense of, the different maps based on our Sacramento maps down below. All right, so I do also want to mention, we know that California is a very large state. It's a lot of territory to cover. And what we wanted to make sure is that that no part of the state felt that they were forgotten or excluded. And so what we did is we divided up the 14 commissioners into these different zone areas. And so I of course volunteer for Orange County because this is where I am, and I really felt that it was important that I be, an outreach liaison. So being able to have somebody, anyone in any of the zones can then reach out to any one of these commissioners for, engagement opportunities to, help with education around redistricting. And, if there's questions, also to send questions to us or to the full commission as well too. And so, we just want to make sure that you have somebody that at least to direct your inquiries to if you had something specific that you wanted to ask of one of us. Communities of interest, I did talk a little bit about it, but I do want to just really emphasize this part. When drawing maps, I said that we have to be mindful of communities of interest. And so, as I said, we can obtain city and county information, but the communities of interest information that we get from you, your friends, your family, your colleagues, your coworkers are the ones that help give us the nuance. And so communities of interest are defined as concentrated populations which share common social, economic interests that should be included within a single district for the purposes of effective and fair representation. So examples can include, similar living standards, having similar cultures, having same transportation facilities, having similar work opportunities, or having access to the same media. People can also belong to multiple communities of interest. It could be where we live, but maybe we work in somewhere different. Maybe it's also where we play as well too. A community of interest is not the same as a district. It forms the building blocks of districts. Another example, I use the stadiums. Another example would be like, the Great Park in Irvine. If you can imagine that was cut up into multiple districts or even two districts, or perhaps, if maybe a university where, like UC Irvine, where, a portion of UC Irvine were to be broken up into different districts, or even South Coast Plaza. You got Crystal Court on one side and you got the main South Coast Plaza on the other side. Even another example is people who live along near the railroad tracks where the Metrolink goes. It could be a very long community of interest. People who live along those that particular transportation corridor may say, we are a community of interest because we have a particular need, that we need somebody who understands what it means to live near these railroad tracks. So that's just an example of a community of interest. So defining your community, there are different ways in which you can tell us about your communities. One is through oral testimony. And I mentioned that we'll be holding public input meetings in which you can come and give us public input in person and tell us the story about your community of interest. You can also call us as well too. We do know that the personal stories are powerful in telling us about what makes your community what it is, what it makes it unique. Maybe, if you were to come and give oral testimony, you could tell us about about your community as if we were visitors from out of town. And these are the kind of things that I think are important. Another way in which you can tell us about your community of interest, and I do acknowledge that, some of us are better writers than we are talkers. And so you might be able to give a beautiful description of your community and your community story by telling us in writing. So you could send us an email, you could write us a letter, or you could use the Communities of Interest tool at drawmycacommunity.org. Tell us why your community should be kept together. Tell us about what binds your communities together, and you could use you could refer to other sources, in terms of references. These are things that are really important. Now, as you're telling us about your communities, you could tell us about your community's issues. You could tell us why your community's issues haven't been adequately addressed by, your current elected representatives. You could tell us even, why you feel like your current communities should stay together, because you want to make sure that your current elected representatives keep in mind and continue to keep in mind the issues of your community. You can tell us about the kind of important services that you want to make sure are understood by those who are going to be representing you. Also, the other thing that we would love for you to share with us is a map. Create a map of your neighborhood or your community or the area that you're talking about. Mark the street names, the significant landmarks in your community that help us to understand what should be inside your community of interest. It could be anything from social service agencies to community centers to shopping districts to schools to religious institutions. You could give your community a name, even though there may not officially be a name. And again, you could use the electronic means by our Communities of Interest tool, or we're also going to be having a paper version of the Communities of Interest tool, or you could, again, send us an email with your own map drawn of the community of interest that that you're describing. So how do you participate in the process? So these are 3 simple ways: describe, draw, and then send. Describe your community, draw your community, and then send us your community, your input on your community of interest. And again, as I mentioned, you could submit it in writing via the drawmycacommunity.org. You could email us. You could write to us by letter. You could even then eventually come and give input during a public input meeting. So there are other ways in which you can, again, do so. And I just told you a little bit about that right now. You can even call us. And I do want to just mention, so if you do work with communities where they may feel more comfortable telling us about their community in a language that they feel more comfortable using, we do have our communities of interest tool available in 12 different languages. And I just want to point out that that's noted on the slide here. And we also have tutorials that are also available in those languages. In addition to the 12 languages that are noted here, I also want to say that we have it in Thai and Hmong as well too. So language access is very important to the commissioner. So we have taken several steps to ensure that more Californians can participate in the process. We have translated materials available on our website. So our fact sheets, flyers about redistricting, FAQs, frequently asked questions about, what is redistricting? We even have this presentation in 12 different languages that can be used by any community leaders who may want to give similar presentations to their community. We are also going to be making available interpretation services for any members of the public who want to give input with 5 days advance notice. And again, written input could be sent in any language and in any format, and it will be translated into English. So again, whether it's for a public input meeting or if it's a business meeting, we are also, again, providing interpretation services with 5 days advance notice. And if it's not one of the 12 languages that we have listed, we are also providing interpretation service in any language, again, with the 5 days advance notice. So I just want to note, if any of you are wondering, hey, the census is delayed. Yes, it is delayed. Fortunately, we were proactive in that we know that with COVID-19, a lot of things have been delayed. And so what we did is, not we, the current commission, but the previous commission and the state went to the California State Supreme Court to request a delay in being able to submit the maps to the California Secretary of State. And so we did get a ruling from the State Supreme Court that we can have until December 15th. Right now, I will say that it was contingent upon us being able to receive the census results by the end of July. However, we do know that right now, we're expecting the census results to be released to the statewide database, which is California statewide database, which is our official, demographic unit, or not demographic unit, I shouldn't call them that, but they're the ones that are able to process the data, and they will be receiving it mid-August. They will process the data so that we can use it, and we expect that we will have that process data by the end of September, and then from there we will begin the process of drawing the lines. If you're interested, again, I encourage anybody to listen in on any of our meetings. Right now, the question is, and you'll see on the slide here, a range of dates. What we're talking about and what we're currently grappling with is, when does the clock start on when we then have to submit our final district maps? And as you can imagine, nothing is done in a vacuum, and the later our submission of the final maps are, then there's going to be impacts to the June election, June primary election. And so right now what we're trying to grapple with is what's the earliest, what's the ideal time that we could submit our final maps. And so if you're curious as to what that decision is going to be, we're currently in some very deep discussions about it during our meeting. All right, so I just want to say thank you again for listening and paying attention and being, interested in the work that the commission is doing. I'm happy to take any questions. And again, I just want to remind everybody that no public input will be taken today, and I'm happy though to answer any clarification questions on redistricting.
Okay, great information, Commissioner. But we have in the Q&A, the first question we have is, couldn't having two representatives for, say, the Platinum Triangle area, the stadiums you mentioned, actually be advantageous when it comes to earmarks and other federal programs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's going to really depend, and I think it's really going to depend on what the people who both live and or work in that area would say about that. It could be, I think, there's pros and cons to everything. From an earmarks perspective, yes, it's going to be great, because then that way, then they'll be able to potentially get, maybe double the earmarks, or participate in double the federal programs, because you got two elected officials. However, there's also going to be times potentially where you do need two elected officials to work together, and they may or may not. I mean, it's really hard to say. I think, I don't want to promise or guarantee, that's the kind of nuance that we don't always know just by looking at a map. That's why we need to hear, from all of the people, who are in California and live, work, and play in California.
Awesome. Okay. The next question, there were criticisms lodged in 2010 that commissioners bowed to special interest groups and unfairly divided the Congressional District 47 and 48 to benefit those interest groups that against Asian Americans. What safeguards do you see in place to dispel such criticism?
Yeah, that's thank you, and that's also a great question. As you can imagine, that has been brought up a number of times to the commission, and we are aware of it. But I think what we want to do is, well, first off, let me just say we're not the 2010 commission, and secondly, what we are going to do and what we're trying to do as best as we can is to ensure that we take into account the public input of all Californians. That ultimately is really what I think all 14 of us are very unanimous about. We're doing this because we want to make sure that the people of California not only have their say, but also, or their voices heard, but that what we are ultimately able to do is to be able to do so in a way that really is going to ensure fair representation for the people of California. And one of the ways that we do try to do it as best as we can is to ensure that the whole process is going to be one in which you'll see how we're going to draw those lines. You're going to see and hear the inputs that we're going to get from people. And I think that's where, again, I would just say mobilizing your communities to make sure that they speak up and they tell us about your communities of interest. And when I say, tell us about your communities of interest, the other thing that I also want to just say is, as you tell us about your communities of interest, also tell us, what other communities do you want to be connected to? So for example, if you're, and this is going to be kind of interesting. I'm just kind of thinking about it in terms of how I'm imagining the geography, and and I do believe that there's going to be a lot of debate about this, but if you're down in South County, do you want to be connected down through Camp Pendleton and into Oceanside? So your district includes part of San Diego County. Or, for example, would you say, no, I want my county to, or my community, like if you're down in San Clemente, would you say, I want my district to be encompassed within Orange County? So I would want to see my community connected to, to not only the communities to the north, like going in towards Mission Viejo and San Juan Capistrano, but maybe even going a little bit further east, going towards, for example, Ladera Ranch or Rancho Santa Margarita, and going up near there instead of going south into San Diego. That's just an example of like where not only what is your community, but where do you want to be connected to? And I think that's going to be really important. I think this is why we're trying to get out as much as we can to ask people, tell us, write to us, come and testify at a public input meeting. What do you want to see? What do you consider your communities of interest? And the more input we get, I believe that the better quality our maps will be and will really represent and reflect the interests of the people of California, not just those that are special interests.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, and how are transient populations, homeless individuals, part of line drawing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's where we're looking for ways, in terms of outreach. We're trying to connect or look for ways in which we can hopefully have the help of community-based organizations to help us reach these hard to reach populations. We know that, just by, excuse me, what we're doing, we're not going to reach every single population that's here in California, including those that are homeless, and then other hard to reach populations. And so as best as we can, we have an outreach committee that is looking for ways to be able to get the word out to different hard to reach populations, so that we can hopefully get their participation in some way, shape, or form, and their input on the line drawing.
Great. Okay. The next question is, did you mention who picks the new commissioners?
So when we were picked, so the process was, it was the California State Auditor's office that went through the whole, process. So they took in all the applications. They had I think a group of people that were selected to, go through everything and, be part of the interviewing rounds. And then they submitted the final 60 names to the legislature. Once the legislature made their cuts, then they were the ones that did the random drawing. So the final, the first 8 were randomly drawn, and then the first 8 then that were randomly drawn then picked the final 6 commissioners to make up the 14-member commission. I wasn't sure if that helped. And then can you see, are you able to see here? Let me just go back one. Let me see if that, oops. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. And there's a question here. Census counts everyone living in Orange County legally, or everybody?
Everybody. It's just about, all the bodies.
Okay. And the last question looks like is, will the community input meetings be throughout the state or only in Sacramento?
Oh, great question. Yes, it will be throughout the state. Right now, I do want to just say that our intent, or the way we're planning the public input meetings, they will be via Zoom. So they will all be virtual meetings right now. We have been talking about the what ifs if we do a in-person meeting. I think we're still trying to figure out, when and which ones, if we do have any in-person meetings, when and which ones that will be. But as of right now, they're all going to be virtual meetings. Although we do have specific meetings designated for specific zones. So for example, for Orange County, which is Zone J, we do have specific dates assigned to Orange County, but because it's virtual, and actually, what I was told is even previously during the 2010 redistricting process, obviously the public testimony or public input meetings were done in person. I was told that people would go to different meetings throughout the state. So so with that said, I do want to say that because everything is virtual, it's easy for anybody to participate in any one of the meetings that we have scheduled for public input. And our very first one is a statewide one, and that's scheduled, please don't hold me to this, but I believe it's scheduled for June 10th. If you go to the Redistricting Commission website, we draw the lines ca.org, or we draw the line ca.org. If you go to it, you'll actually see that we'll be putting up the schedule for the public input meetings. But if you want to, you could go to the header that says meetings, and then when you hit meetings, there's meeting handouts, and the meeting handouts from yesterday's meeting, which is 5/17, I think, 5/18. You will see that there's a list of proposed dates for our public input meetings. We approved and we agreed upon the meetings that are scheduled up through July 12th. So if you're interested in which date, so in other words, you don't have to go to the meeting that's designated for Zone J. You could go to any meeting based on a date that is convenient for you. Thank you again, and please, I know that you do know the the county well, and just want to really encourage all of you. Please tell us, because I think the nuance and the knowledge that you have about the county is going to be really important to all of us in understanding, how we can draw better maps. So thank you to you all.